My name is Jai Vargas, and I am the Vice President for Strategic Engagement and Initiatives here at ACER. Welcome to our next session, Getting Board Buy-in for Diversity and Inclusion. I'm so excited to hear from 3 of our seasoned corporate board members as they share their experience-based tips on making the case for D&I initiatives to corporate boards of directors. Before I go ahead and introduce our moderator, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Target. You'll be seeing one of their very short videos right here. Thank you, Target.
2020 turned our world upside down. We faced challenge after challenge. We changed how we work, play, and live, all while acknowledging the role we must play to create a more equitable world. Here at Target, we've had a long-standing commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. These values are fundamental to our business, and they shape our culture. And we set goals every 3 years to align us on our priorities and hold ourselves accountable to the progress we want to make as an organization. We're incredibly proud that the work we've done over the past 2 years has put us on the path to meet or exceed almost all of our diversity and inclusion goals. Since 2019, we've increased the representation and advancement of women and people of color. We've increased sales in product categories like beauty, toys, and food that help make us more relevant for all guests. And we're on track to meet our spending goal with diverse suppliers. We have more work to do to reduce turnover of team members of color, but we're encouraged that that work is in our sights and we're driving towards positive progress. Our efforts are making a difference in our stores and our communities, and they're helping us fulfill Target's purpose to help all families discover the joy of everyday life. We look forward to continuing this fabulous journey.
We appreciate Target so much. Target has been a dedicated supporter of Hispanic inclusion. We are so proud to have them as a longtime partner. Now, please welcome our moderator for the discussion. She is the president of the League of United Latin American Citizens, and they are an ACER Coalition organization member. Please welcome to the stage, Sindy Benavides.
Muy buenas tardes y bienvenidos. My name again is Sindy Benavides, and I serve as the Chief Executive Officer for the League of United Latin American Citizens. I am a proud ACER board member and so happy to be with you today. A huge shout out to Sid Wilson and the entire ACER team for all that you do, and to Target, mil gracias for investing in our communities, for standing along our side and locking arms. Today, it is my privilege and honor to moderate this panel, Getting Board Buy-in for Diversity and Inclusion. And I want to bring to the stage our 3 wonderful speakers who will talk a little bit about their experience and also address a couple of questions that have been top of mind for so many of us. First and foremost, let's welcome to the stage Ana Dutra. And Ana serves as a board of director for CME Group. Ana, in a minute, I will ask you to introduce yourself as we bring the other panelists up to the stage. Second, a dear friend and somebody that I have known for over a decade, the Honorable Nelson Diaz, who serves as the board of director for PECO, an Exelon company. Nelson, welcome to the stage. And lastly, also George Herrera, who's an independent director of the board of directors for travel and leisure. And with that, why don't we just take a minute or two to introduce ourselves? And I'm going to kick it over to you, Ana, starting with a little bit about your background. I love the fact that you're Brasileña and that you bring so much experience from across the U.S., especially being out of Chicago and now Florida. But why don't we kick it off with you, and then we'll turn it over to Nelson and then George. Ana.
Muchas gracias, Cindy. Buenas tardes a todos. Boa tarde para todos vocês. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here. As Cindy mentioned, I'm born and raised in Brazil, but spent the first time of my career working all over South America. Then came to the US to actually get my MBA. I worked for IBM at the time. And the rest of my career was running businesses in the professional services and technology sectors. My last two roles were as the CEO of the Korn Ferry Consulting, and then as the Executives Club of Chicago. And then after that, I started what I call my portfolio career. I serve in a number of corporate boards, for public, for private boards, as well as a number of non-for-profit boards, including the Latino Corporate Directors Association, where I co-chair the Latino Corporate Directors Educational Foundation as well. I have three wonderful daughters. My husband just retired, and we moved from Chicago to Florida.
Muchísimas gracias, Ana. To the Honorable Nelson Diaz, why don't we take it over to you? And Nelson, you might be muted.
Yes, I was muted. Is that better? You know, I feel like I'm the old guy in the group all the time. So I started as a White House fellow when I served in the White House, and there were very few Latinos in the White House, Sindy, if you look back at those days. And today we have a large group of them. But in addition to that, I have been a judge. I have been the lawyer for the City of Philadelphia, City Solicitor. I was a general counsel at the Housing and Urban Development. And I was the board member of a Fortune 100 company known as Exelon, which has a utility and a generation portion of his company. And so I try to practice law once in a while. So those are the areas. And I have been involved in so many organizations, including your organization, Sindy, LULAC, that it's, I don't want to go through the whole episode. But if anybody really was very interested in my background, just buy my book, No Soy de Aquí, No Soy de Allá. So you get it at Temple or Amazon. So give me a free advertisement there.
I love that plug-in, Nelson. And I know also that Ana is also an author. So we'll put that plug-in later. George, why don't we turn it over to you?
Sure, thank you. And I've read the book. It's a great book. And Nelson,
thank you, George.
Nelson is an old dear friend of mine. So, but thank you, Sindy, for the opportunity to join you, and thank you, Sid, for inviting me. George Herrera, born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. I started my career in the mid-'70s when my sister started a management and financial consulting firm by the name of Burgos and Associates in 1976-77. I became president of the firm in 1980, and within 2 years, we had 125 employees and 10 offices throughout the United States, becoming then the largest Latina woman-owned management and financial consulting firm in the United States, and ran that company for approximately 23 years. And in 1998, became president and CEO of the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. During that tenure, about a year later, I had the opportunity to create the first ever Hispanic content English language television show on NBC, which was called Hispanics Today. The show aired for about 10 years, about 30 million viewers. From a monthly show, it became a weekly syndicated show within 6 months of airing. During my time at the Chamber, also helped create a $100 million private equity fund named Hispania Capital Partners. And in 2004, I had an opportunity to join a Fortune 40 company as a member of the board of directors, and the company was known by the name of Sindy. Sindy was a huge conglomerate company. We owned Orbitz, Cheap Tickets, Coldwell Banker, Jackson Hewitt, Century 21, and the list goes on and on and on. And I replaced, at the time, the Honorable Ex-Secretary of Defense, William Cohen, and I joined the board in 2004, becoming the first Latino on the board, and subsequently have been on the board of 3 other public-owned companies. And that's kind of the little story of George Herrera.
Muchísimas gracias, George. And I know that so many of us have followed all of your careers. You know, for individuals tuning in who may not know you, please Google them. You could actually find all on Google and find a lot of information. And so before we dive into D&I did want to ask each and one of you, how was it joining your first corporate board? And, like, what were the steps that you had to take in order to get there? And why don't we start in reverse order, George, with you, so that you're not always the last one to answer?
Well, my opportunity happened during my tenure as president and CEO of the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And in 2004, I, at the time, requested that Henry Silverman, who was the CEO of Sendit, to come and address our organization at our annual convention in Phoenix, Arizona. And Henry came out and served as the keynote speaker of our opening breakfast. And he ended up staying for approximately a day or so, and a lot of his C-suite employees came and participated in our 4-day conference, and he spoke. It's an interesting story, but it's true. He spoke Thursday morning at our opening breakfast, and Saturday evening, as I am getting dressed for our gala, I get a phone call on my cell from Henry Silverman, thanking me for inviting him to come to address our group at the opening breakfast, and advising me and asking me whether or not I would have an interest in joining the board of Sindy, that he was very impressed with the organization and with a lot of the things that I had accomplished at the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and that there was an opening because the ex-Secretary of Defense, William Cohen, was stepping aside and resigning from the board, and didn't know much about public company board opportunities at the time, but agreed to come to New York and meet with the governance committee and the nominating committee. And shortly thereafter, I was asked to join the board of Sendit. And that was kind of my journey into the board. It was really having an opportunity to network with Henry Silverman, who was the CEO of Sendit. And within a couple of days thereafter, Henry just asking me to join the board. And that's how the journey began for me.
Gracias, George. And Nelson, turning over to you, do you remember that moment when you first got asked to serve on a corporate board?
Yeah, I have been an advocate for boards for women and minorities for over 30 years. And so I had been involved in trying to open those doors. And I was then the city lawyer and have been working on some economic projects, both with the gas company and what we call the Industrial Development Corporation of the city. The chairman of that organization invited me to serve on the board, and I said, "How far can I jump? When can I go?" And you don't have to rush at this thing, So as soon as the mayor was reelected, which was my commitment to him, I then went on the board and served for over 12 years, and then continued to serve now in the subsidiary portion of their board. And right now, I'm still heavily involved with the company. They're dividing the company again into two segments, and we have a Latina on the board of the Exelon company. And we hope that when they break this up, that there'll be another opportunity in the broken organization, which I think is going to be called Constellation. So there are board opportunities, and so from serving on the board in 2004, ACED asked me to get involved in working on the issue of the boardship, and so I started then. And there are about 4 or 5 of us who are still around, who stayed and actively pushed for the formation of the Latino Corporate Directors Association. And I've been involved in that since 2005, and will probably rotate off in November this year. And I have to say that it's been a wonderful year, because there have been about 23 board seats that have been filled in this past year, which is the most that I've seen since I've been around in 2004 in terms of pushing Latinos for boards. And so I feel that my mission should continue to push those efforts, which have been somewhat a grateful period, but it's not enough, because we are 18% of the population, and there are only about 2.7% of corporate board members, and particularly Latina women. Very few Latina women on corporate boards. It was 0.1 when I started. It hasn't moved. The decimal point hasn't moved a lot, but it's moved somewhat. And so I'm very happy. I was heavily involved in the women's movement too. The sad part about the women's movement for me is that the biggest beneficiaries were white women, and we were unable to parlay that into Latina women. And so LCDA has been the most effective way of opening those doors, and I said had a lot to do with it.
No, muchísimas gracias, Nelson. And I know, Ana, that you've been heavily involved with LCDA. I would love for you to talk a little bit about who LCDA is for folks who are tuning in who may not be aware of LCDA and the great work that they do with Esther Aguilera and the entire team over there. But as well, speak about your experience as a Latina woman joining your first corporate board.
Yeah, so I always say that people should think about their board trajectory as any other career, right? So you have a career where you start in junior levels and then you learn more and you become more experienced and get promoted and promoted. And boards are no different. You can't go from not serving in any board and expecting to serve on a complex, regulated public company board. In my case, it was really interesting because I really started serving on the PTA board and on the travel soccer team boards, and that's where I learned the board basics. And after serving on a few non-for-profit boards, what happened was that somebody saw how seriously I took my job and the work and all that. And when there was an opening in that person's corporate board, the corporate board this guy served in, he came and talked with me and said, listen, we've served together on this non-for-profit board. I've followed your work. I think you would be a great addition to our board. And I said, well, why not? At that point, I didn't even know if that was something that I wanted to do in scale. And I had experienced the non-for-profit side of boards. And then I said, well, why not? And that was my first corporate board, and I enjoyed so much the work and the giving back that I continued to do so. But sometimes people ask me, well, why should I serve on a non-for-profit board? What will that lead to? And I say there are so many reasons to serve on a non-for-profit board as at least as a starting point. The first one is giving back, is providing your experience, your expertise, your skills to a non-for-profit organization. The second one is actually learning board dynamics and learning what it takes to chair an audit committee, for example. And the third one is your network. You never know who is going to be watching you. And next thing is that serving on a for-profit board leads into serving on a corporate board. So that's how it started for me. Let me tell you a little bit about LCDA. So LCDA, Latino Corporate Directors Association, we have two classes of members. We have the experienced directors, so people who are already serving on public company boards or very large private company boards. But then we have the members who we are preparing. They are high potentials. We are preparing them to serve in large boards. And as a proud co-chair of the Latino Corporate Director Educational Foundation, what we provide is training like the Board Ready Institute, which is a phenomenal platform, not only to learn about what it takes to serve on a board, how to behave in a corporate setting, what are the main governance principles, but also to get the support to interview for boards and the mentorship from the other members. So we are, as Nelson mentioned, still a young organization, but growing like crazy, making tremendous progress in terms of advocacy, preparation, training, the supply side, working with regulators, legislators, proxy advisory firms, and under the leadership of our phenomenal Esther Aguilera as our CEO. So I would urge those who are not familiar with the organization but are interested in having a board career to check it out.
No, muchísimas gracias for that, Ana. And we're a proud member of the Latino Voices for Boardroom Equity, along with the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Unidos, and so many others that believe so much in diversity in our corporate boards. And, that's a really good segue because it's so important that we recognize the false narrative that has been built around Latinos in America, including the part that, Latinos have always been a part of this country, right? Like we are not, the majority of us are not immigrants. The border crossed us. We didn't cross the border. And I just think of the Guadalupe Hidalgo Treaty, which annexed not only Texas, but Colorado and Nuevo Mexico. And so making sure that we understand that Latinos have always been a part of this country is really important, as well as all the contributions that Latinos have made. And I say that as I think not only about our numbers, 70 million strong, and in just 30 years, Latinos will be 130 million strong, which means that in the context of America, 1 in 3 Americans will be of Latino ancestry. And so as we're looking at strategies, what have you experienced as you build participation and engagement and D&I efforts across the board? How do you bring, the case for making sure that diversity includes Latinos, that we're looking at boards at, not only in terms of gender equity and different ways that we measure equity, but we make sure that there's ethnic and racial equity as well. And so why don't we kick it off with you, Nelson, and then we'll pivot over to Ana.
Sure. The issue for me, as I said to you, is a long way. I was in my 30s when I started to try to impact the issues of corporate board and the participation. As I got on my corporate board, I utilized the relationships that I had to try to inculcate in the culture of the company the need to have diversity and inclusion, and that included, whether it was procurement, whether it was employment, and whether it was people on the board. But today we have come into a segment because of Black Lives Matter and some of the activism that's occurred, that ESG, which is the issue of environment, diversity, community relationship, and independent directors, is become a measurement that is being looked at as part of the corporate dynamics. Why? Because if you have a diverse board, it has been proven that your company does better and the profit-making process is better. So there is a business process in which we measure the accomplishments of the executives and the executive suites and the employees on how they do with regard to these ESG measurements. And that gives us an opportunity now, I believe, to begin to bring in people of color, women, and other elements of the community to strengthen the corporate board and to strengthen the C-suites so that the employees and the company really reflects more what America is like, especially when you talked about the fact that we're going to be 130 million, which means that there's going to be a Latino in your family pretty soon. So they might as well buy into making sure that the development of the independent boards and the C-suites, that it includes not only African Americans, which obviously they should include, not only includes women because they're 50% over of the population, but it should include Latinos because sometimes Latinos are looked at as the second level of opportunity. But I tell my executives, you do not have a true diverse board if you don't have a Latino on the board.
Thank you so much for that, Nelson. Ana, why don't we go next to you?
Oh, sure. Here's an interesting thing about, now we talk about DE&I, right? And 20 years ago, we only talked about diversity, and diversity was numbers. The numbers were not even out there, were not even being accounted for. Then we start to talk about diversity and inclusion. So as a friend of mine and I always say, diversity is counting heads. inclusion is making heads count. So it's not just having the women, the Latinos in the pipeline and in the board, but it's also making sure that they have as strong a voice as the other members. And then we discovered that, hey, we're making strides in diversity and in inclusion, but equity is not yet there. And as both a Latina and a woman, and of course as an immigrant, I've been experiencing that being paid less. Let's say it like it is, than my white male colleagues, and we continue to see that everywhere. Nelson brought up the ESG metrics. I happen to have done a ton of work. I continue to do a ton of work in this area. And when you think about DE&I, it's not only good business, but when you think about companies being measured on their progress on ESG, on environmental, social, and governance, DE&I cuts both through social, with corporate social responsibility and social impact, but also on good governance practices, right? So we need to continue to push for that, not because it is just the right thing to do, but because it's also good for business, and because, quite frankly, all company stakeholders, whether they are partners, customers, employees, suppliers, they want to see people who look like them in the boardroom. They want to see people who look like them in the upper level management. And one thing that in the clip that you played, Target talked about their diverse suppliers. That is the ultimate multiplier for D&I, for diversity and inclusion. The first time I saw that was actually Coca-Cola back 20 years ago. They wanted to make sure that every consultant, every supplier who worked for them had diverse management, diverse constitution. And while at that time, I worked for a company that was a subsidiary of another company, so we had limited say in who the company used as suppliers. Just the fact that our customer was asking for that made us look and reflect on who we were giving business to. So I think that now with organizations like SASB and others that are measuring and trying to put more structure around ESG, although I think we're still going to take a long time before it's not a one size fits all, but we are definitely paying more attention to D&I as well, and we need to leverage that in each and every way we can, whether it is with proxy advisory firms or with investors or with legislators or with regulators. We need to pull on all fronts.
Muchísimas gracias, Ana. And George, turning over to you again, talking about, getting board buy-in for diversity and inclusion and making sure that Latinos are represented. How do you make the case for Latino representation?
Well, for me, it was, I think I had an easier role compared to a lot of, Latinos and Latinas that get on corporate boards and try to make the case, to their respective board and or CEO. When I was asked to join the Sindy board in 2004, Henry Silverman, the CEO, sat me down and he said to me, look, the reason you're here is because obviously you're a Latino. We're looking to penetrate the Latino marketplace. And this was in 2004. So this was 17 years ago. And shortly thereafter, by 2006, I became the chair of the governance committee. And Henry made it very clear to me, George, I want you to own this. I want you to drive this. I'm going to own it, but I want you to drive it, and I want you to, bring about the necessary awareness and advocacy that is necessary in order for our company to become, best in class as quickly as possible in the area of D&I back in 2005 and 6 and so on. So as soon as I became chairman, I started benchmarking us with a lot of other corporations in the country. I definitely started to establish a dialogue within our board to make the business case and to get D&I indoctrinated into our DNA. at Sendon and at Wyndham Worldwide, and it was easy. I had a CEO who understood it, who got it. We were not in this to feel good about it because we were going to feel good about it. They knew I wasn't going to be playing along with it. And as chairman of the governance committee, I owned it. So at every board meeting, we had presentations on D&I across all of our corporate pillars, whether it was supplier diversity, philanthropic dollars, C-suite opportunities, employment opportunities to ensure that we have enough people of color within the pipeline so that they can ascend into manager, director, vice presidents, SVP, EVP type of positions. So we were very, very aggressive. But for me, it was easy to do because the CEO understood it. The CEO wanted to make it happen. He took ownership of it, and he ensured that it was driven down from all the C-suites. One of the things we initially did in 2006 that we tied the C-suite bonuses to each C-suite member. Bonuses were tied into meeting diversity and inclusion goals. Very shortly thereafter, we were named by Diversity Inc. magazine for several years as Supplier Diversity Company of the Year because we just took a hold of it and drove it. And my mantra was simple: if we're good enough to buy your product and services, then we're good enough to be part of the process from the boardroom all the way down to entry level positions within the company. So we established the metrics, we drove it, we hired the right people, we diversified our board, we had people, we had people of color, we had people we had gender diversity also within the board. So every board that I've joined, we've always had a very, very good mix of gender and racial diversity on the board. And I've been lucky enough, I stress lucky, that I've just had, I've had an opportunity to work with CEOs that just got it. I didn't have to make the case, and they just told me, George, this field, you're the expert at it, drive it for us and make it happen for us. And then what we did was we went out and we hired the personnel to be able to drive it and to hold us accountable within every levels of our corporation. So hold us accountable to ensure that we were a company that was reflective of our consumer base and our customer base, because it made good business sense. It's a business imperative. It was a business imperative. I made it very clear to the board that, listen, we all know that our initial responsibility is a fiduciary one to our shareholders. But having a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders also ensure that we are very aggressive as it pertains to D&I, and that we have, a diverse and inclusive culture in all aspects of our corporation. And in many instances, we lose focus. A lot of times we talk just about, let's say, supplier diversity, and a lot of corporations want to be best in class in supplier diversity. But a lot of corporations, for example, in our philanthropic dollars, no one was ever looking at what our foundation was giving out and where was that money going to. And it wasn't, until I took the helm as chair of governance that I said, hey, I want to report. I want to know where our dollars are going to. And that's where we were able, obviously, immediately to identify that initially our foundation dollars were not being invested with diverse organizations throughout the country. So we took a look at that. We started benchmarking ourselves against other corporations in that respective area. And, it kind of snowboarded from there. And we continue to be, best in class. And now we're a travel and leisure company. It's the same. Mike Brown is our CEO. Mike Brown gets it, understands it. And we evolve, as Nelson and Anna mentioned, with what's happened over the last 12 to 16 months with, the George Floyd, the horrific murder of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. So now you're starting to see that we now have a lot more robust dialogue around social discussions and social issues. And as a company, what is our role now in terms of creating social impact and ensuring that we're also now being a socially responsible company along the lines of ensuring that we can effectuate change, within communities of color on the grassroots level as it pertains to education, as it pertains to delivery of services to communities. So, you're seeing we're doing a lot of outside of the box initiatives and things at Travel and Leisure Company, particularly where our corporate headquarters are, which is in Orlando, Florida. So you have to be in a position to be able to transition. 5 or 6 years ago at the board, we never really had a discussion on social issues or social activities. Look at how major corporations now are being very vocal on those states that are implementing these crazy, voting, laws that are being passed. And look at the stance that Coca-Cola is taking, and JP Morgan and some of these other companies, where now they understand that they also have to elevate their presence and become more of a social, become a good social citizen within those communities and listen more. Okay, listen to what is taking place, so that it's an evolving process. So I can tell you that over the my 17-year journey of sitting on a public company board has just been so much transformation and re-engineering. But it just makes it a whole lot easier when you have a CEO who gets it, who understands it, and who says, "Hey, we're not in this, to feel good. Okay, we're in this to create change, to create impact, and to ensure that our company is very reflective of our consumer base and our customer base." And that's something that, as chair of corporate governance and travel and leisure, that will continue to be our mandate.
Muchísimas gracias, George. And as you can see, we're very passionate about this discussion. I know that we're already getting so many questions from the audience. I'm going to combine a couple of questions that are coming in, and feel free to just chime in, Anna, Nelson, and George, depending on the question that you feel comfortable responding to. So, one of the questions that I see is that I'm a high-ranking executive at my company, but there are restrictions to contacting my board members. Can you give any advice on how I can connect with the board of directors at my company to promote D&I topics? And similar to that, there's another question about, the company talking only about D&I once in a while and not consistently. And any advice on how to make D&I part of the agenda in every meeting? And Nelson, you're muted.
I'm muted so that I won't interrupt anybody else. But let me tell you what I've done with regard to that issue. When we were in terms of dialoguing with regard to diversity and inclusion, one of the things that I emphasize is that you have to share your talent with the team and become part of the team in order to show that you have the capabilities. And so they were talking about succession. And one of the most important things that we do in a board is succession of leadership. And they had talked about a number of women, African Americans, and it was really a very worthwhile discussion. And after the meeting was over, I asked the chairman. I said, "Look, don't you have a Latino at all in the company? We in Chicago, we're a large portion of the population. Philadelphia, a large portion of the population, and so forth. And it really behooves you, if you are really interested in diversity and inclusion, because the board was diverse and it wasn't. But the question was, why was it all just black and white or male female?" And he said, "Well, I don't know any Latinos in the company that would have." So I basically said, "Look, I went to every segment of the corporation to meet all of the executives before I went to my first board meeting. And I really knew a lot of the individuals and looked at, both in the legal area and in the management area, who were some of the talent that was there. Well, I took a person, gave him this person, a Latino. He said, "Well, he's not really a Latino." I said, "Would you bring him in here? I wanted to let you know if he's really a Latino." "Why is he not Latino?" "Because he's so smart." Well, because he was an engineer and a lawyer, so he figures, they put Latinos into jobs that have no promotion capacity, whether it's EEO or human resources or social activities. And so this guy is right now the CEO of the Chicago utility, and is going to be the CEO of one of the breakout companies. So to some extent, you have to, if you are an employee and you have a relationship and don't have a relationship with a board member, I think it is incumbent in terms of our community relationships to be able to just get to know, reach out, and you are at the same time are helping that board member secure talent so that when he's in a board, I mean, there's not that many people like George who has the capacity in terms of the governance committee to dictate. Many of us have to sell it and have to prove the settlement of it and have to show how competent this person is. And when I brought this guy in, his first activity, he made a $50 million injection into the company based on his first injection in terms of the management capacity. So once you have a P&L responsibility and you give a person the opportunity and you have to identify that, I think that begins to open the door for Latinos. But I never let myself be led by the fact that I cannot reach out to the Latinos in the company. I went to all of their affinity activities. I get to know many of the Latinos who work in the company and got to know many of the leaders. So to some extent, if they're prohibited from going in, me as a board member made the effort to go into the company framework.
Muchísimas gracias, Nelson. And, like as we live of the times that we're living in, how can we as Latinos work closer with our Black, Asian, LGBTQI, and women board directors to collaborate so that we don't divide ourselves when advocating for more people of color, women, LGBTQ members, Latinos? What would be some of the strategies that you have used to make sure that we as Latinos too are very inclusive?
Yeah, let me tackle that one, because we're actually living through that in an organization called Women Business Collaborative, where I serve on the board, and I lead the Diversity on Boards initiative. And in this Diversity on Boards initiative, we have more than 12 partners, which include LCDA and ELC and Women Corporate Directors and PECO, Ascend. And when I started to invite all those organizations, people told me this is not going to fly, because they're going to be competing with each other, and there'll be territorialism and all that. And I said, well, let's at least try. And what I learned through that effort was that, provided you understand that, number one, people represent their organizations first, and then overall diversity second, and you respect that, and also that people can work together, but also recognize when there's a conflict of interest. For example, if there's only one spot, of course, PECO would want to put an Asian, ELC would want to put an African American, LCDA would want to put a Latino. So who are we fooling here? But at the point that we actually recognize that and say we are going to voice when we identify a conflict, and just agree that we're not going to tackle that together because we may have conflicting objectives, I think things can work out. The other thing is that we have to celebrate increased diversity and inclusion together and not separately. So we have this overarching goal, which is to increase DE&I on boards. And then in addition to that, organizations will have their individual goals as well. If we work that way, I think we can all be successful and happy. I also want to go back with the first question that Nelson eloquently addressed from the board member perspective. But sometimes you're in the organization, right? You're in the organization and you're seeing things happening, and you're seeing D&I not being brought up at the board level. Figure out, for the person who asks for the advice on how to connect with board directors to promote D&I topics, I think that the first question you want to ask yourself is, why is that happening, right? Is it because the CEO holds his or her relationships with the board very close to the vest? Or is it because D&I as a topic is not a high priority for the organization? Or is it because the board is very detached from the rest of the organization? Now, what can you do as an executive? you can help the organization to be successful in front of the board. So what I would say is that if you have an ERG in the organization, become a leader in the ERG to the point that that will create pull, that the CEO will want to expose that ERG to the board. Create a partnership with HR. That cannot be perceived that your effort is about you. It's got to be about the initiative. It's got to be about DE&I and not necessarily about exposing you as an individual to the board. And I think that creates the kind of pull, hopefully, that you want to see. And if at any point you decide that, hey, D&I is just not a high priority agenda topic for that organization, then you have a different decision to make.
Thank you so much for that, Ana. And I know that we have come to the end of our panel. Thank you so much, Ana. Muchísimas gracias, Nelson y George, for joining us, for your insights, your guidance, for your expertise, for your leadership, and making sure that we continue to pave the way for our Latino community. I will just end it by asking the audience, if you have not yet read the report, the Missing Pieces report, which is done in partnership with Deloitte, make sure that you take a peek at it, take a look at it. It's so important that we understand the data to be able to drive policy and continue to make those changes and continue to advocate and raise and elevate our voices and make noise in making this issue a priority. To ACER, to Sid Wilsing, to Adriana, and to the entire ACER team, muchísimas gracias for all your hard work and for putting this together. Gracias.
Great job, Sindy.
Gracias.
So much.
Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Sindy, for moderating. And thanks to our panelists, Ana, George, and Nelson, for sharing your experience to empower others to advocate for Hispanic inclusion in the boardroom.